With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Chav Aleph. Chevra, Yoma Daf Chav Aleph is just like if someone were to ask you that where can I find in Chazal Sipurei Tzadikim? And the answer would be learn Masechta Tainis. Learning Masechta Tainis is learning Masechta of stories of Tzadikim. If someone were to ask, where can I find a daf that is all about miracles, a miracle daf, that's Yoma Chaf Aleph. And just like we say that Kol Haloime Toiras Oila Ki'ilu Hikrav Oila, may we merit by learning Chaf Aleph, Pasha to merit miracles. It's a daf not from this world. And it actually begins, we left off on Daf Chaf Amid days where we're speaking about things that are metaphysical. I know we're learning the words, it's good B'chlal, that what we're learning is beyond the literal, it's beyond our understanding. We should be zoicha to properly understand that which we are reading. We are learning about the sound produced by the sun. We're going to be learning about different events that create some sort of sounds that are heard throughout the world. And from there, on Daf Chaf Aleph proper, as we mentioned, we are middle of a machlokes between Rav and Rav Shila. What does the Kriyas HaGever mean? Rav says Kriyas HaGever means that there was a person designated to awake everyone involved in doing the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, not only Kohanim, Levilim, and Yisraelim, but Rav Shila held that Kriyas HaGever refers to the calling of a rooster, that it was from those sounds that we knew when to start, at least during the year, aside of the few exceptions, aside of Yom Kippur, aside of Yom Tov, to begin the daily avodah of removing the shovel full of ash, the avodah of Trumas Hadeshen, we're going to start to learn about the miracles that happened in the Beis HaMikdash. Now we're going to begin with the nest that's also mentioned in Pirkei Avos Perikei, that even though we were oimdem tzfufim, even though we stood mamish crowded together, there were so many people in there that if you mamish, there was no room between one person and the other. Nevertheless, when it came to the times of the avodah, that all those who were present needed to properly bow down, and the bowing down on the Beis HaMikdash is, as we'll learn later in Yoma, was even more than the way we bow down in Galus on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur during certain parts of the davening. We mamish needed to go to lay down on our stomachs and to extend our hands and our feet. So if you're standing in an environment where you're mamish packed in English the expression like sardines, how do you do a hishtachava? And furthermore, it's not only a space issue, it's like Rashi is going to point out, during the bowing down, we would say vidui. We would confess the failings, the weaknesses that we have, asking God to forgive for the past and empower us to get better in the future. And it's very important when a Yid is confessing his or her sins for other people not to hear it. Confession is between man and God. Not lahavdil the way other goyim think that you confess in front of another human being. We don't do that. So in order for one Yid not to hear the vidui of the other, there needed to be space. And the amazing miracle that while we bowed down, everyone had at least 4 amas between one person and the other. This whole idea that space did not take up that much space. And this is also connected to what we learned in the last Daf Chaf Amid Beis. We were speaking about how once the Kohen Gadol, when he shouted Ana Hashem, how his voice was heard in Yerichai. So we were suggesting that maybe this doesn't only point out the koyach of the Kohen Gadol, it also points out the amazing level of the Anshe Yerichai that were on a very high level, that they were a little bit Lamayla Mahamakim. Which is why, even though they were 10 parsois far from Yerushalayim, in this Olam Hazeh, Olam Asiyah, on their Madrega they were much closer. So they taka heard because they were closer. As we made the link between the sugi we have in Psachim, that they were Korch and Neshama, the way Chassidus says that they did not even go into Yehuda Tata because they lived on the level of Yehuda Ilah. So we're going to have the concept that in the Beis HaMikdash proper, everyone stood a little bit above the limitations of time and space. And actually, once we quote the Neis of Oimdim Tzfuchim V'Shtachim Ravachim, the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. For people that will pay attention, you will see that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, the way it's quoted on Yoma Chaf Aleph, is not the way we have it in our Siddur. Bechlal Pirkei Avos has, like all Mishnayos, you have the Braisas. So the Braisa that expounds all of the Pirkei Avos is called Avos de Rab Nosson. We have them in the Shas. It's very geschmack because Pirkei Avos, I know it's beautiful. It's 5 prakam of Mishnayos in. It's the 6th Braisa, the 6th chapter. What we call the 6th chapter is not Mishnah. It's already called Braisa. But we only have one Braisa printed in the Sidurim. So the minig is to say Pirkei Avos, we start from the Shabbos after Pesach all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. Every Shabbos, another Perek unless you are right before Rosh Hashanah when you put them together, if need be, v'chulei. But the opposite of Nasan is a lot more expansive. So there, Taka, when you look in Avos Rab Nasan, you will Taka read many more miracles. But interestingly, that when the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, it's going to have, people won't realize it, but if you pay attention, our Mishnah doesn't match the Mishnah that we have in the Sidurim. Nevertheless, we're going to learn about the 10 miracles that happened in the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara is going to point out that really the latter 2 of the 10, as we also have in the Siddur, are miracles about Yerushalayim, not the Beis HaMikdash. So we're going to look for the 10 miracles in the Beis HaMikdash proper, which is going to already make the Gemara quote from various other sources of Tanoim additional miracles, and it's going to go from great to greater to amazing miracles, mamash nisim v'neflois, of that which happened in the Beis HaMikdash, and v'oid v'hu ha'ikr, that which will happen imminently in the 3rd Beis HaMikdash. We're going to learn about the Neis Gadol of the Lechem HaPanim. We're going to learn about Davar Zeh Mesoiris B'Yodenu, that Makim Arein Einoi Min Amida. All this is Yoma Chaf Aleph. We're going to learn about the 5 things that were said regarding the fire on the pyre. The fire was a miraculous fire, which will actually make us contrast the 1st Beis HaMikdash and the 2nd Beis HaMikdash. There were 5 things that we did not have in the 2nd Beis HaMikdash. We're going to be learning about 6 different types of fires. 6 different types of fires. And ultimately, at the end of the daf, we're going to learn about the knowledge of being, let's call this a wind reader or a smoke reader, to know how to interpret the movement of smoke. Because when you have a column of smoke and it's going to the north, that means that there's a southern wind. Or if it's going to the south, it means there's a northern wind. And we're going to have an insight how to interpret the meaning of those winds during a certain time of the year, and a lot more. It's mamash, it's a mystical daf and a miracle daf. Says the Gemara, we are in daf chaf, Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. So we were speaking about this nothingness, or the sun dust that is in the air only during the daytime. So the Gemara continues about the sun. Tana Rabbanan, ilmale galgal chama. If not, now we're going to add the words for the sound produced by the movement of the sun. Now, what sound is that? Even if it's also a physical sound, it's a sound that we are so habituated to hear, we don't even hear it anymore. It's a constant sound. But if not for the sound of the moving of the sun in the Galgal Chama, or if the movement of the Galgal Chama, then we would be able to hear Nishma Koil Hamoina Shol Roimi. So Hamoina Shol Roimi means the crowds of Rome. Hamoina Shol Roimi means that when you go into a busy city, there is a constant buzz sound from the people. That's why people, you go out of a city, it's a lot quieter. When you are in the city, you won't even notice it. We're not speaking about one car going by. We're speaking about a constant sound, again, that you get habituated to. You don't even notice it. So there is a sound of the movement of the Galgal Chama. There is a sound of the Hamoina Shol Roimi, and each one drowns out the sound of the other. I think it's called in English white noise. Right? The constant, many people at night, they put on, white noise means there is other noises, the irony. So this sound drowns out that sound. So there's a sound of the Galgal Chama, there's a sound of the Hamoina Shol Roimi, and each one drowns out the sound of the other. But since we have both, so therefore we hear less, our ability of hearing is diminished. And again, this is connected to what we spoke at the end of last year, that the Anshe Yericha hearing the Kohen Gadol was a testament, Aleph, to the Kohen Gadol, and it was a testament to the listeners. In other words, when I'm trying to listen to you, if I am focused on something else as well, it will disable me of hearing you even better the way I should. And weiter, Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in Abrais, there are 3 sounds that influence the entire world. They travel throughout the world. Now, does it mean physical? Could be. It can mean not only physical, but certain things affect everyone in the world, and everyone hears about it. It influences them. The Elohim, Koil Galgal Chama. And you see this nowadays. In other words, when there is a natural phenomena, right? There is a solar flare. It's it influences the entire world. That's the way maybe you can teach it today. This last line of the Amid, Koil hamoina shloraimi. The sound of a big urban center, in other words, the tumult, it's not only the physical sound, there's an influence. People get together. I mean, the ideal is the Koil HaMoina Shal Yerushalayim, which is the whole purpose of Yerushalayim, of gathering a lot of people together, but all around godliness and about Torah and about mitzvahs. This doesn't only impact the Yidden, this impacts the whole world in a good way. And in the opposite way, when you have a Hamoina Shal Raimi, people are gathering, Lav Dafka around Inyan Shal Kedusha, it has a certain influence, let's say, around the whole world. It can also mean physical, that there's so much sound that it travels around the world. And listen to the third one. The koil neshama b'shah sheyotzim min haguf. The sound of the neshama while it departs the body. Now, it can be, again, something physical that we are not aware of or we are habituated to. And also, if we're speaking about an influence, that's the way it works. That when there is a passing of a person, every person who passes away influences the world. Again, you have to be ruchniisdik to pick it up. It's every person is so significant that when they're no longer here, there's what they call also an English expression, the butterfly effect. So I might not have known Chaim Yankel that's living somewhere in India. I don't know him. But he passed away, so that affected his chavedim and his community, which affected another community. It influences the whole world. Amazing. And the last one, Afleida, even the birth. And let's follow this perhaps interpretation. The reason why it's only a V'yesh Oimrim is because when someone is alive, then they are actively contributing. Every human being. And when they pass away, so that contribution is no longer in the world, it's felt. And the big Chachamim understand which sound is no longer here. When a person is born, you can argue, while the birth, they're not contributing anything yet. So that's why maybe the first Shita didn't bring it down, but the second opinion says no, just the existence of another person influences not only his family, not only his community, not only his country, the ganze Welt. Daf Chaf Aleph. And v'yesh oimrim af ridia. Gabakuk. What's ridia? Sounds like rodeo. It's connected to that. So ridia, says Rashi, there is a malach that is in charge of the rain. In other words, it's God is running the world, but the influence of godliness as it manifests in rain, it goes through what we call a malach. And being that rain is needed to plow the fields, so the malach has the appearance of an animal that's plowing a field, and that malach is called ridia. No, it looks like a young bull. So the influence of, let's say, of the weather, godliness through that malach also affects the whole world. So when there is a drought in one part of the world, or God willing, when there is abundance in one part of the world, it affects that sound. That influence is of the entire world. Now, regarding the sound of the neshama leaving this world, that there was a certain influence, and this is obviously a non-positive influence. Someone passed away. So it was too much of a downer. So the Chachamim asked Hashem for Rachmanis, Ubatlua, and this coil was taken away. Again, I'm not suggesting that none of this should be taken literally. So let's say that there's some sort of sound, kipshutei, and whether we hear it, whether we don't hear it, whether we are habituated to it, whatever it wasn't the past. These are from the other things that Punkpi have in Masechtas Yoma, that there were times that Chazal got together and they really affected a change in the way things used to be. Like we'll have on Daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, that the Yetzer Hara that we used to have for Avodah Zarah was partially removed from us. So here we have this concept, which is more metaphysical, that this coil that is created by the passing was removed from the world. Says the Gemara, okay, 3 lines from the top, now that we brought the Braisa that spoke about Givini Cruz, that was used as a proof to Shitas Rav that Kriyas HaGever means Kara Gavra, now Tanya Kavasi de Rab Shila, that the Kriyas HaGever that we have in our Mishnah Daf Chav is actually speaking about the cry of a rooster, the call of the rooster. That was normally the time either a bit before or a bit after, or on that time where the one who was doing the Trumas Hadeshen did actually that avodah. So says the Gemara, it says in the Braisa, that if a person is going on a trip, And we had this guys in the Psachim Daf Beis, the importance of traveling dafka during daytime and not during night. So hayoytze laderech koydem kriyas hagever. Here clearly kriyas hagever is referring to the call of a rooster. So damay beroishai, the person has his blood on his own head, which means that if something happened to the person, and here we're speaking again like we had in Psachim, what can happen at night? So there's the influence of mazikin, of demons that are demonic forces that have the permission to interact with us dafka during the night more than during the day. So if something, and that can manifest directly or it can manifest through people that channel the koichos of mazikin, it's his own fault because he shouldn't have traveled when it's dark. And that's already enough. In other words, here you see that kriyas hagever means the call of the rooster. Now details in the Braisa. So does it mean that when you hear the rooster call right away you can begin your trip? Tanach says yes. Even though the rooster begins to make noise way prior to light. However, Rabbi Yoshia says, no, Achi Yishna. Not when he called for the first time, but when he called for the second time. Then it's even closer to the day. Only then should you set out on your trip. And v'yesh oimrim Achi Yishalesh, until he called, the rooster makes noise for the third time. And furthermore, ube'eza tarnagoil amru. Here you see clearly in the Braisa that kriyas hagever is referring to a rooster. So it is betarnagoil beinani, and an average rooster, and not the ones that don't have the level of bina. They don't have the foresight. Not the ones that only call out when it's light in your face. Not the great chachamim that they call out even prior, but the average tarnagol. And again, that's the first of the 15 brachas we say in the morning, that hanoisem lasech vivina lahafchin ben yom uven laila. And the uniqueness of the sechvi, of the tarnagol, is that he's mafchin even before we can discern the light. Says the Gemara, being that the Mishnah Daf Chaf mentioned that the reason why on Yom Tov the Trumas Hadeshen happened even before midnight, it happened at the end of the first watch, was because the Azara was gepakt in the morning. By the time of Kriyas HaGever, the Azara was filled up. So now let's begin about the amount of people that went into the Azara. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, B'shosh Yisrael Oilim L'Regel, during Yom Tov time. You know how many people were inside the Azara? You know how many people that oimdim tzfufim, that we stood gepakt together. We were like sardines crammed together. Like Rashi writes 11 lines from the top of the Amid, tzfufim loshin tzof, miroy va'am hoyin nitchakim, ish ba'achiv, ve'ein loy mokim lintois al tzidoy lokan o lokan. There was no room. You had a person to your right, you had a person to your left, you had a person in front of you. And v'zokuf kekoira, you stood like a cedar beam. And furthermore, says Rashi, that if sometimes your feet were lifted from the ground. Those of us who had the schus to be in 770 with the Rebbe, that was the experience. There were so many people that, if you jumped up, if you managed to jump up, you wouldn't land. That's how packed it was. So even though we were so crowded together, nevertheless, the miracle that happened was that when we needed to bow down, Rashi 50 lines from the top of the Amid, there was a miracle. Not only did we have space to bow down, that in itself was a miracle, but after we fully extended ourselves, between one Yid and his neighbor, there were 4 amas. That's Pshat Revachim. Not that, okay, so I needed to bow down, so I extended my hands and my feet, and I didn't bang into you. But between the extremities of your body and of my body, there was an additional 4 amas. And why was there that much space? I mean, Hashem doesn't do a nes lemagana. So Rashi writes, because when we bow down, we said vidui, and it's that important for one never to hear the vidui, the private confession of his fellow. For the fellow saying vidui should not be ashamed. So God created that amount of space. Furthermore, says the Braisa, v'nemshachim achas esrei ama achoyrei beis hakaporos. Now these are the beautiful dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash that we have been learning with already over the last 2 weeks. If anyone has a picture here of the Beis HaMikdash, that will be helpful. But as we spoke out, when you go from east to west, so first when you enter, you go through the Soideg, and then that area is called the Chayil, between the Soideg and the walls, the eastern walls of the Azara. You enter into what we call the Ezras Nashim. Then you walked up the 15 steps that we spoke about. You went through Shad Niknar, and now you entered Ezras Yisrael. Now Ezras Yisrael was only 11 amas from east to west. The width was very wide. It went throughout the entire 135 amas width, shkoyach for that picture of the Azara. But the length, meaning from east to west, was only 11 amas. After that, you right away entered the Ezras Kohanim, whether there was a step going up, Kishitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, whether there was no step going up. Now, people, where did they stand? So the Mishnah says, the Brisa says over here that it was so packed that we even when we're standing, we needed to go, guys, if you look at the picture, behind the Heichal, behind the Kodesh Kachim, still the Azara. You are still within the walls of the Azara, towards the westernmost part of the Azara. There was an area that was behind the Kache Kachim, that is called many times the house of the cover. Interesting. Not the house of the Aron, not the house of the Luchais, the house of the Kapaitis. And parenthetically, Api Chasidus, the Kapaitis is the Keser, is the highest level. Right, the Luchais was Torah, and what was the Kapaitis? The Kapaitis were the Kruvim. The Kruvim represented Hashem and the Yidden. Hashem and the Yidden, how we are connected beyond any other connection. We don't need anything to connect us. Right, the Tlas Kesharim, one of them is through Torah. One of them is independent of Torah. That's the highest Madrega. That's the level where every Yid is a Chelek Alikami Mamish. So a Yid is a Yid is a Yid. That's why we call this room not the base Aron, but the base HaKapoides. So we found ourselves even behind there in those 11 amas. On the picture all the way to the left. Now the Gemara asks, hold on, you just said there was a miracle. You just said that when we bowed down there was ample room. So why did we have to go all the way behind there? Maika Amar. So the Gemara says, no, we are explaining the miracle. Hakika Amar. Afal Pishanam Shacham Achad Esri Ama Choyde Beis HaKapoides. And then therefore, even though before bowing down, there was no room. Now we attempted not to enter Ezras Kohanim. So when you need a spillover space. So where was the spillover space? You know where it was? On both sides of the Azara, the northern and southern side, all the way by the ends, we began to go to spill over to the two sides. That means we were in the 11 amas, Ezras Yisrael, from one side to the other, and then all the way on top of the picture, all the way in the bottom of the picture, we began to go to the sides of the Ezras Kohanim. We didn't want to invade the Ezras Kohanim, and there was no room. So we went and we were pushed, and we were packed even behind the Beis HaKapoides. Now those 11 amas behind the Beis HaKapoides, that's not Ezras Kohanim. We filled that up entirely. So it's Ke'ilu, if you would take a visual from the top, aside of the Ezras Nashim, in the ladies section, the men almost formed a circle around the Heichal. Because we were towards the east, the entire strip. We were in the west, the entire strip of 11 amas. Obviously, the way we got from east to west was by walking through the edges of the northern and of the southern part of the Azara. And even when we took up that box or that circle, we were gepakt, and yet, says the Mishnah, when we bowed down, there was not only room to bow down, there was 4 amas between one yid and the other. Moededik. And that's how we're going to go from here, speaking about all of the Moededik and Nisim that happens in the Beis HaMikdash area, in the temple complex. Now, if you want to open up a Siddur and look in Pirkei Avos Perek Hey, you will see it's not going to be aligned. Doesn't matter. Let's learn the Gemara. And now, this is the quotation from the Mishnah. Number 1, a woman never miscarried because of the aroma of kosher meat. And as we know, as Chazal tell us, that aroma stimulates desire. When a pregnant woman desires something, if she will not get that desire met, then God forbid it could cause a miscarriage. So the nes was that there was never a miscarriage because of the aroma, the delicious aroma of kosher meat. Now, miracle number 2, lo yisriach bsar hakodesh me'olam. Never did kosher meat become putrid. Now that's a big nes. Because let's say shlamim could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Yerushalayim HaKodesh sometimes can be very hot during the summer. Sometimes there are no clouds. There was no refrigeration. They didn't store the meat anywhere. If a shlamim was offered early in the morning today, Sunday, and it was only eaten Monday before Shkia, that it b'chlal did not become putrid is a miracle, ever. Another miracle, when you put the evadim on top of the mizbeach, even though we spoke in the last year about how it got burned, and normally it finished burning, it became charcoal. What happened when it rained? What do you think? When you put meat on the mizbeach and it rained on the mizbeach. You know what happens when what that causes is that the meat, the evarim, doesn't burn that quick. There were actually times that it took a few days for the meat to fully get burnt. Yet it never became putrid prior to it getting burnt. Let's go weiter. Miracle number 3. No one ever saw a fly in the butcher house, in the butcher area, in the Azara. As we had the picture before, let's find HaMizbeach, with the tables, with the door pillars, with the rings. Not a fly. Amazing. Miracle number 4. That the Kohen Gadol never had a seminal emission on Yom Kippur. Now people right away jump and they say, what's the big nes? So first of all, it was common then that when people slept, they had involuntary seminal emissions. That was a common thing. And we also learned that they never allowed the Kohen Gadol to fall asleep. That's because we said, Ein soimchen ala nes. Ein soimchen ala nes. And even though that normally the Kohen Gadol Taka would stay awake, but there were times that the Kohen Gadol slept. And even when he slept, he never had a seminal emission. There was never a time that there was a keri l'Kohen Gadol. Miracle number 5. Now we're going to begin counting each one separately. That will be number 5. The omer is the barley that needed to be harvested the night entering the 16th. The night of the 16th, and when we harvested this new barley, we were not allowed to harvest more than needed. We harvested exactly the amount of an omer. If, for whatever reason, prior to offering the omer, it would have become invalidated, there are so many ways for kachim to become invalidated. Let's just say it became tamei. If that were to happen, we would be stuck. We would be stuck because you can't just harvest now new barley. You have to harvest it the night before. And we were not allowed to harvest backup. And you know what? We never got stuck. No, it's even though halachically we were not allowed to create plan B, we never needed plan B. And now we're going to count this now as a 6th. Similarly with the shtei halachim. The 2 breads of chametz that were offered with the 2 lambs on Shavuos, like Rashi reminds us, they were not allowed to be baked on Yom Tov. They needed to be baked prior to Yom Tov. Here again, we did not have any backup breads. If these breads would have become invalidated, we would not have the shtei halachim. No, it's al pi halacha, don't do a plan B. Mamash, the opposite of Yoma. The whole Yoma, the first Mishnah was a backup Kohen Gadol, according to Rav Yehuda, a backup wife. These items, God says no backups. And the miracle happened that throughout Zman Bayis Rishon, Zman Bayis Sheni, we never needed the backup. And number 3, so now number 7, we are counting this as 3 separate. The omer, the shtei halechem, same thing in the lechem apanim. The lechem apanim was not baked on Shabbos. The lechem apanim breads were baked on Friday. They were put on the table on Shabbos. Now what were to happen if the breads became invalidated? I'm just using Tuma as one example. What happens if one of the breads broke? There were no backup breads. If something would have happened which would invalidate any one of the 12 loaves, we would not have the all 12 loaves. Miracle upon miracle, it never broke. That picture is for later, but that's okay. Now number 8, the way we're counting, Oimdem Tzfufim, the one that we began, and that's connected to Yoma Daf Chaf, when we spoke about the reason why the Trumas Hadeshin on Yom Tov was done at the end of the Ashmura Rishayna, because there were that many Yidden in the Azara, that's just the flow. Even though Oimdem Tzfufim, Tzfuf means it was packed, it was jam-packed, but when we were Mishtachim Revachim, I heard a Gewaldige concept that when you look at the Ksav Ashuri, when you look at the letters in the Sefer Torah, so many letters, they have like a top roof. Like think about a base, just for example. And then you have the right side line that goes down, right? So you'll notice that the thickness of the top horizontal is a lot thicker than the vertical side. And the reason for that is a reminder of oimdim, the part of the ois that's standing, the vertical letter is tzfufim, is gepakt. It's narrow. And the one that's laying down, both on the top and on the bottom, is mishtachvim nevachim. And al pi Chasidus, it's easier to understand it. In other words, really, God is lamayla mahamokim. God is above space. When we are connected to that level of godliness, we don't take up space. When are we more connected to God? When we have bittul, when we're bowing down. When a person is standing in life, when I'm standing my position, well, that's not bittul. And yes, there is a time when you have to stand your ground. But then you're not going to tap into above space. Lamayla mahamakim. So when you're oimdim, it's kapakt. Then I go and I don't have you. We contradict each other. If we are both bittul, when we are mishtachvim, then there's room for everyone. Now, number 9, if we counted oimer, shtei alechem, lechem upon him as 3 separate ones, we're up to number 9. That never did snake or scorpions damage, hurt anyone in Yerushalayim. The miracle is, it's not that there weren't snakes and scorpions in Yerushalayim. There were. Even though you had nechashim and akravim, they never hurt anyone. That's a nes. And number 10, no one ever complained to his colleague by saying, Tzadli hamakayim. Oh, it was so cramped when I went sha'olin b'Yerushalayim, when I went to sleep in Yerushalayim for the Yom Tov. Again, the miracle is not that it wasn't cramped. It was cramped. How can you have millions and millions of Yidden all packed into the old city? Or was it cramped? But no one said, oh, is it cramped? Because of the joy of being in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, they didn't complain about it. It's a very important nakuda that. Okay, so now that we counted the 10, the Gemara has a bomb question. By the way, again, you look in the Mishnah that we have in the Siddur, it's not exactly all of these that we mentioned. But let's go through our count. Problem is the Mishnah begins about the 10 miracles, right, that happened Beis Hamikdash. The last 2, Nachash va'akriv, Yerushalayim. The last of no one complained, Sadli hamakayim, Yerushalayim. It's not in the Beis Hamikdash. So fragt the Gemara, Pasach b'Mikdash v'siyah Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, you're right. Now, why does the Mishnah put it in there? The Gemara doesn't even address that question, but that's a good question. We want to simply get to the number 10. So let's find 2 other miracles. There were 2 other miracles that happened in the Beis Hamikdash. That never did the rain put out the fire on the pyre. And sometimes it pours in Yerushalayim. And fire and water are opposites. And the stronger one conquers the other one. So either the fire evaporates the water or the water puts out the fire. No matter how much it rained, the fire never went out. Number 2, the Ashan Hamaracha. Guys, we're not speaking about the Ketores. We're speaking here about the smoke that came up from the pyre. That smoke column, afilu even if it was very windy, all the winds in the world were blowing on it. It never scattered the smoke. It always remained a column. That's a mighty dikanes. Now this miracle will be the last miracle that we're gonna explain on today. Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Don't have the image that it never budged. We'll see. It's not that it didn't move. It never got scattered. The winds did affect how it would, it would lean a little bit to the north, it would lean to the south, it would lean to the east, it would lean to the west, but it remained a column. Mamish like a palm tree, right? A palm tree, on one hand, it's solid, but if the wind is blowing, the whole tree is moving, but the whole tree is moving. It never scattered up. So now we have 10. Fragt die Gemara, what v'su leka? Are there no more miracles? The first white line. We learned in a Braisa, said by Rav Shemaya, Where did he teach this Braisa l'choyre? In a place called Kal Nevoy. And what did he say? That Shivrei Klei Cheres Nevloim b'Mekaimam. So when you have a Klei Cheres, a earthenware utensil that was used to cook, let's say, a shlamim, that's not a good thing. Why is it not a good thing? Because since you cannot fully purge Klei Cheres, like today in our kashrus, if Klei Cheres absorbed the tam of something that's prohibited, you can't get it out through Hagala. Don't forget that kachim have a expiration date, and after the expiration date, it's called noisar. So if you use the klei cheres to cook psar kachim, any psar kachim, the moment the expiration time comes about, day and one night, max 2 days and one night, then the taste of the kachim is noisar. So first of all, and you can't do hagala, you have to break it. But hold on, breaking it is not enough. Why is it not enough? Because what are you going to do with it? You're going to remove it from the azara? How can you remove it from the azara? Kachim cannot be removed from the azara. So if there was ever a klei cheres that had in it the tam of kachim, balua, it was broken and it was placed on that little amma by amma to the east of the mizbeach. The same area where they would put the ashes of the Trumas Hadeshen, they would put those shards in that location. The floor of the Azara was marble, was stone. Nevertheless, a miracle happened that it was swallowed, it was absorbed in the ground. It went through the stone and it disappeared. And furthermore, Amar Abaya, it wasn't only the miracle of that location swallowing the Shivrei Klei Cheres, that Mura'ah v'Noitza, the crop, carbon oila so'oif, right? Even though the kohen would shecht it on top of the mizbeach, that's the avodah. Bird oila is on the higher part of the mizbeach, but he needed to remove the crop and its feathers, the murah v'noitza, and he would throw it in that same location, in the location where they would put the ashes of the Trumas Hadeshen. And first of all, how the aim must have been amazing. If he missed a place, another coin put it there, but the earth also absorbed it. Likewise, v'dishun mizbeach hapnimi, that when they would clear off the top of the inner golden altar from the ashes of the ketores of yesterday, they would put it in this location. Likewise, v'dishun hamenoira, like we spoke about hatavas haneira, is the 5 and the 2. Where would they put those used wicks, etc.? They would put it in that location, and all of them were nevlaim b'mekaimam. So here we have a kasha. That's another miracle. Now, before we go on, the last Tosfos in the Amid points out, why didn't the Gemara speak about the ashes of the Trumas Hadeshen itself? They were also Nivlaim b'Mekaiman. Tosfos holds, indeed, even though it's not mentioned, that's another miracle. Bottom line is that whatever was put in that location got absorbed in the ground. And therefore, why isn't it mentioned? Answers the Gemara. When we go back to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, we spoke about that never did the Omer, never did the Shtei Alechem, never did the Lechem upon him become puzzle. Don't count it as 3, since it's all about not becoming puzzle. It's considered one miracle. If it's considered one miracle, so now you're missing 2. What will be the supplemental to Klei Cheres was not swallowed, and the Murah, v'Noitza, v'Dishun Mizbeach HaPnimi, v'Dishun HaManoira, and according to one opinion and Tosfos, the Trumas Hadeshen was also swallowed. So Psulei Tlasahava, but only Chashvinu B'chad, only counted as 1. So therefore, Apik today, you lost 2. And now put in these other 2, V'ayil today. The problem is, why is it 2? Why is it 2? Just like Psul is 1, they are all the same miracle that the ground swallowed. Even though this is Klei Cheres, and everything is other stuff. So what? But really, you should only count them as 1. So bottom line is, we're missing 1. So if nothing became possible is 1 miracle. The Nivloyin b'Mekaimam is another miracle. The last 2 mentioned in the Mishnah is about miracles in Yerushalayim, not the Beis HaMikdash. So count it now. You only have 9. Answers the Gemara. Ikanami Achriti. There is another one. Again, the Gemara is not even addressing why didn't the Mishnah count it. That's not the point. The point is we're looking for 10. A big miracle happened with the lechem upon him, and that is silukai kisidurai, that it was just as fresh by silukai when they removed it. They removed the lechem upon him after it was on the shulchan for 1 week. Really, it was baked even a day earlier. It was baked on Friday. So it was just as hot when you removed it, like kisidure, as it was when you arranged it on the table. Shenamar, as it says, and that's the meaning of the pasuk in Shmuel, that lasum lechem choim, that I placed hot bread, but you know when it was hot, biyoim hi lokchoy, on the day that I removed it. Okay, when you say warm, I hear we're having a picture on the screen, warm. It wasn't warm, it was smoking hot. Not hot, smoking hot, as we'll see in a moment. In other words, people from the distance would see the smoke going up from the lechem apanim. That's hot. Well, it's not enough. Okay, good, we have 10, but there's more. No, the following, we have a tradition. We have a tradition because no one had the chutzpah to go verify it. It's not that something that we know because we measured it, but who cares? More important, we have a tradition. That makim orain eina min amida. That the makim of the orain did not take up any of the dimensions of the Kodesh Kachim. So we have been learning so much in the last week about the dimensions of the temple complex. Let's focus on the Kodesh Kachim. The Kodesh Kachim, right, was 20 amas by 20 amas. Was 20 by 20 amas. The Aron was placed in its center. That's how we'll learn right now. So if you were to place it in the center, that's a good picture to the bottom right. If one would have measured, they would have measured 10 amas from the easternmost wall to the Aron. If they would then measure from the other end of the Aron to the western wall, again 10 amas. You would have 20 amas total space. Same thing would be from north-south. If you would measure from the wall until the Aron, until the outer part of the Aron towards that wall, you would have 10 amas. Well, if that's the case, then the room should have been bigger than 20 amas, because don't forget, the Aron itself was 2.5 amas by 1.5 amas. That did not take up any space. So it did have the dimensions of 2.5 by 1.5, but it did not consume any of the dimensions, any of the midah of the Kodesh Kachim. And not only was that regarding the Aron HaKodesh itself, but since Shlomo HaMelech, based on prophecy, also added. Not only we learned a lot already about the 10 additional menorahs, the 10 additional shulchanos that we had in the Bayis Rishon, Shlomo HaMelech added, by God's instruction, in the Holy of Holies, 2 stand-alone keruvim. 2 stand-alone keruvim. Now, they were not made out of gold, they were made out of olive wood. The picture is very helpful to appreciate the miracle, because the keruvim were not, so to say, the keruvim were standing side by side, and the wingspan, one went from where they were standing all the way until the eastern wall. One went from where they're standing all the way to the center above the kapoides. Same thing was with the other keruv. There was a total of 20 amas. Each keruv, each standalone keruv's wingspan total 10 amas. The only challenge is that if you have this being, right, this wooden standing keruv, and you have a wing extending on each of its sides, but then there is the width of the keruv itself. Since we know the room had a total of 20 amas, each wing was 5 amas, 5 is 20. How did it fit? L'chayra, from one end of the wing to the other end of the wing should have been more than 10 amas, because it's 5 amas and 5 amas from the wings plus the keruv itself. But nevertheless, it fit. So v'amar Rabbi Noi, Amar Shmuel, 3 lines from the bottom, that keruvim also b'nei Yisrael oimdim, because they did not occupy space. So why isn't that mentioned? Answers the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because these are miracles that happened inside. No one saw it. Nisa de baroi kochashiv. We only mentioned miracles that happened outside, that people witnessed. Nisa de gavoi like kochashiv. But now we got a problem. Because how did we come to 10 by adding the miracle of the lechem apanim? I know that here we spoke about the Holy of Holies. The Shulchan is in the Holy. So what? But it's indoors. No one saw it. The second to last line. Lechem apanim nami. It's only Nisa de gavoi. Answers the Gemara, no, even though it happened inside, everyone saw it. When? During Yom Tov. Lechem apanim is considered Nisa de baroyu. To Amarei Shlakish. Ma'idich what's the meaning in the pasuk? Al hashulchan hatohir, which implies tohir. It's a table that is susceptible to becoming tummy. It could have been tummy. Problem is, how can that table b'chlal be susceptible to becoming tummy? Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. We got to make a miracle of time for time not to take up time. That clay eitz ha'asir linachas, any large wooden utensil that was designed to remain stationary, is never susceptible to tumah. And therefore, the rule is that if there's tumah in one room, and then you are in its adjacent room, and let's say there is a window that has at least the size of a tefach, if it's open, the tumah travels from one room to the other. Now what happens if you have this large, movable piece of furniture that blocks off the window space? Does it block the tumah? It depends. The rule is that something that's susceptible to tumah cannot halachically become a barrier to tumah. So it goes one connected to the other. Bottom line over here is that l'chayda, the shulchan apanim, was never moved. So it's considered a keli hasil lenachas. So it's always tad. Why do we have to say tad, which implies that it can become tameh? And the answer is no, it was moved. It doesn't mean that it was moved to the outside, but it was every now and then lifted. That's called moved. They would lift it on Yom Tiv. So guys, the bread can only be taken off Shabbos. If you want to show everyone that the bread is smoking hot, well, if Yom Tiv fell out on Shabbos, they would not have to lift the table. They would simply take the bread out for everyone to see that it's smoking. But since Yom Tiv many times falls out in other weekdays, not on Shabbos Kodesh, and they wanted everyone to see how it's smoking, so they would lift the table high enough, it would remain in the heichel. But people were already able to see the smoke coming off the breads. And they would tell the Yidden, look how God loves you, how you are, how we are beloved. And that love was expressed, and by the way, just like which means that we were above space, this is a miracle of above time. Why is it a miracle of above time? Because when you take bread out of your oven, it's smoking hot by you also. What makes the bread cool off? Time. With the passage of time, things cool down. If you are connected to godliness, lamayla mahazman, then time has no effect. And Shenemar, again, the same pasuk, lasum lechem chaim b'yomi lakhay. So that answers why we're still by the 10 and we didn't add any more. But we're not good enough. Anything that happened outside, that was discernible outside, or discernible by the people outside, is mentioned? No. The Suleka, isn't there any other miracles? Now listen to this. This is going to blow your mind. When Shlomo Melech built a Beis Hamikdash, not a boy kol minei migadim shel zahav, he planted all types of fine golden fruit trees. We are not allowed to plant trees on Harabayis. We have to remove all the trees off Harabayis. Shlomo HaMelech wanted for there to be trees, but you can't have normal trees. No problem. He figured out how to plant golden trees. He planted a golden orchard. Listen, these trees produced golden fruits. When did they produce golden fruits? Let's say he planted a golden apple tree. Whenever the apple trees in that region were producing a yield, that is when these trees grew golden apples. And the same thing was with vines, grapes, and other fruits. At their appointed times, they would produce fruit. And when the wind would blow, once the golden fruits were full, were mature, they would fall off. And you know what? The Kohanim had the right to take these fruits for their own benefit. They would sell them, and that's how the Kohanim had parnasa. Yes. Amazing. As it says, Yirash kalavanon piriyoi. There's a bracha that all the fruits of Eretz Yisrael should grow in abundance. Growing in abundance, meaning just like that when Yirash, that when the wind blows, that it should be so abundant that the wind itself should already harvested fruits off the trees. And like Levanon, guys, Levanon doesn't mean Lebanon. Levanon means like the Beis HaMikdash. One of the names of the Beis HaMikdash is Levanon. That's a mace that everyone saw. When the Goyim entered the Heichal, from then Yavesh, those trees dried up. As it says, Uferach Levanon, that the flower of the Beis HaMikdash, the flower of Levanon, was devastated. This actually refers to Menashe, who brought an Avodah Zarah in the Beis HaMikdash. And the consequence was that this miracle stopped. And says the Gemara, you should know, this miracle is coming back. As it says, Paroyach tifrach v'sogel. Wow. That it will blossom abundantly. Paroyach tifrach. And v'sogel, we will rejoice. Af gilas v'nanein. We will rejoice with joyness. We're going to rejoice with glad songs. Why? The first medium-sized line, because kavod halavanain, because the glory of the temple is this golden orchard. Nitanla will be given back to her when Mashiach will come. So why didn't the Mishnah mention this? Answers the Gemara. Now listen to this word. Nise de kavia loy kochashiv. All of the miracles that we learned above were not items that they were miraculous the whole time. So let's say you had people standing and it was fakvetched. When we bowed down, a miracle happened. You had meat, the meat never rotted. The flies never came in. But if you're speaking about a gashmi item that was a continual miracle, the miracle was affixed in something, we don't count it anymore. And how true is that by us, right? The sunrise is a miracle, my friends. We don't call it a miracle. It's happening the whole time. An item that has a nes affixed in it, it can be the greatest miracle. You get used to it. You don't call it a miracle. That's why we don't count it. So now the Gemara adds, what was the question? Why didn't we speak about the Aron, the Kruvim, that they didn't take up space? It's also Nisi the Kviya Ninu. It doesn't. The lechem apanim is counted because the lechem apanim, lechem being hot is not a miracle. The fact that the heat never left it, that's a miracle. So ironically, the greatest miracle, a physical thing that is one shtickle miracle, that's not mentioned at all. Now let's go back. Omar Mar, the master taught us that the Ashana Maracha, that the smoke of the Maracha never scattered. Frek the Gemara, what are you talking about? Umi Hava Ashan be Maracha, was there smoke at all? There was no smoke leaving the pyre. Why not? Because it was a miraculous fire. That fire did not produce smoke. V'hatayim, we learned 5 miracles, 5 unique qualities were said regarding the fire that was on the outer altar. Number 1, Revutza Kari, it crouched like a lion, which means that when Shlomo HaMelech, when Moshe Rabbeinu built the Mizbeach in the desert, then later when Shlomo HaMelech built the Mizbeach, and we're going to learn in Kachim how he really made the Mizbeach much larger. So it was a new Mizbeach. Something that looked like an ember of fire came down from the heavens, and it landed on the Mizbeach and it stayed there. It took the form of a fiery lion, and it ate up all the karbanos. And you should know, it looked like a lion. Ubara kachama, it had the shine of the sun. Can you imagine? Couldn't look at it. V'yesh b'mamish, it had substance. Our fires, not the fuel, not the wick, not the wood. The fire is not something with mamashes. This fire had a greater mamashes. It had more substance. When it ate up something moist, it did so the same way it ate up something dry. A physical fire, when it burns something dry, it burns it gently, right? There's no resistance. When fire burns something that's moist, there's crackling sounds. There's like a whole war going on. This was such a fire that Lachem and Yaveshim was the same. And the Eina Mala Ashan, it did not produce smoke. So how B'chlal was there smoke? Answers the Gemara, Ki Ka'amrinon Behedyet. Yes, God provided the miraculous fire, but aside of that, we were commanded to put on the Mizbeach physical wood. And that produced a physical fire. Mitzvah lo havim in ahedyet, the whole concept that God gives us is koyach malmayla. We have within us godly fire, but we can't only rely on that. We are obligated to do our own avodah. Now, our human fire is on of a much lower level, but it's precious to God because it's our efforts. And all of that comes from the Mizbeach. The Tanya, as we learned, that the Bnei Aaron should put fire in the Mizbeach, meaning, even though fire comes down from the heavens, still mitzvah of him in a head yet. Gewaldig. Now, Bisman by Yisrishoin, all they put was 2 logs of wood in the morning, 2 logs of wood in the afternoon. They didn't need more. We'll see later how Bisman by Yesheni, the miracle was substantially diminished. Says the Gemara, Revutza Kari, it looked like a lion. No, Vahataya didn't learn Amar Abachanina. Rabbi Hanina was from the second Beis Hamikdash. He was the Skana Kehanim. That Anida Yisua, I remember, I'll testify, I saw that. But it was Revutz like Akelav, it looked like a dog, not like a lion. So the Gemara answers like Kasha, Kam Migdash Rishon. Migdash Rishon was built by Shlomo. Shlomo HaMelech comes from the tribe of Yehuda. Tribe of Yehuda manifests itself as represented by the lion of Yehuda, and the Khan was in the times of the Bayis Sheni, Migdash Sheni, that was built by the Persians, and the Persians sometimes in Chazal are compared to a bear, and sometimes in Chazal they are compared to a dog. Was there such a fire in Migdash Sheni? What's the meaning of the pasuk? That when Chagai said regarding the building of Bayis Sheni, that the Ertzaboy go up and build it. And Chagai says that God will be pleased with it, the Ertzaboy. And the Ikabda, Hashem says, I will be honored through the second temple. Now the word the Ikabda is written without a hey. It's pronounced with a hey. Korin and the Ikabda. But Maishna, why is it that the Kri is without a hey, the Ichabda, just a Kametz Dalid, da, the Ichabda? So that's a remez that 5 things were missing. These are the 5 things that separated the first and the second Beis Hamikdash. The first one is the first 3. The first 3 is 1. Orain, and the Kapoiris, and the Kruvim. They were not in Bayis Sheni, as we learned in Shkolim. Actually, they were hidden by King Yoshio 35 years before the Churban Bayis Rishon. But Bisman Bayis Sheni, they were Bechlal Nadir, on the revealed Kodesh Kachim. Number 2, the Eish, this fire. You didn't have this Bisman Bayis Sheni. Number 3, the Shechina. Number 4, Ruach HaKodesh, the Nevuah, by the Nevi'im. And number 5, the Urim V'Tumim. And as Tosfos writes, the second Tosfos, the last Tosfos in the Amid, it doesn't mean that the Choshen Mishpat was not there, because then the Kohen Gadol would not be wearing the 8 begadim. He would be a Mechusar begadim, which cannot happen. He had the Choshen Mishpat, but it didn't function. And perhaps if the Urim V'Tumim refer to the parchments that had on it the Shem Ab engraved, which was put in the pocket of the Choshen Mishpat, that's not part of the beged. So the Shem Kodesh was not there, but the outer garment was there. Be that as it may, you see that there was no fire. So answers the Gemara, Amri, now in may have a hava. You did have the fire. It looked like a dog, but there was this miraculous phenomena. Elama siyu Messiah. It did not help consuming the karbanos. It was just there. So there was some manifestation of godliness in a miraculous way, but it didn't consume the karbanos. Now that we spoke about this unique fire, so we learned in a Braisa, Sheish, Ishois Hein, there are 6 types of fires. 6 types of fires. Yesh oichelas ve'ena shoisa. Type number 1 is a fire that eats but doesn't drink. We'll explain each one. Fire number 2 is it's a fire that drinks but doesn't eat. Fire number 3 is it eats and drinks. Fire number 4 is v'yesh oichelas lachan kiyavation. It consumes that which is moist exactly the way it consumes that which is dry. Number 5, there is a fire that expels fire. And the final 6, v'yesh eish, that actually consumes other fires. Now we'll touch each one. Yesh eish oichelas v'eina shoy. So what fires eat but do not drink? That's our fires, natural fires. Because solids fuel fire. It not drinking means, even if there's a lot more fire, more than the water, so it evaporates the water, but the water is not fuel to the fire. It's not oichelit. Yechap, solids fuels it. Liquids fights it. Number 2, shoyse ve'ein oichelis. What fire is fueled by liquid and not by food? The choilin, sick people. Notice when a person is sick and they need to drink and they lose their appetite, that's because the fire of illness, right, is being fed by moisture. By the way, that fever is actually healthy because it's helping the body. The body is burning the machla away. And what that fire needs, it needs liquid. We have to drink. Number 3, what fire actually used even water as its fuel? That was the fire brought down by the heavens, by Elyahu and Hara Carmel, as it says regarding the trenches around the Mizbeach, that was filled with water. So the pasuk writes, Esamayim, Asher Bate'Allah, the waters that were in the trenches was Lechecha, the fire licked up. And the Chazal understand it's not that the fire evaporated those waters, is that it was a type of fire that actually used the water as its fuel, as it does solids. The next one is Oichelas Lachen Kiyavation. That's the fiery lion that we just spoke about. It was a type of fire that it didn't make a difference whether it's consuming dry or whether it's consuming moist meat. Same thing. But the whole concept of having cracklings, of having a noisy fire, which shows of a machloikis, of a one trying to overcome the other, that all represents a more coarse animal soul that's not giving itself over to the fire of the godly soul. So when Bisman Bayis Rishon, there wasn't such a struggle. We gave ourselves over a lot easier. The next one, V'yesh Eish, Doicha Eish. Which fire expelled fire? Where do we find that Gavriel? Where did we have the story? Rashi reminds us. We had this towards the end of Psachim, Daf Kuf Yud Ches, that when Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, when they were thrown into the furnace, so Gavriel asked of God to come and save them. Gavriel is a malach of fire. So if he's coming to save Jews from fire, it should make it worse. No, he cooled off the fire. The presence of Gavriel cooled off the natural fires, which is how they got. Now, we actually learned over there that it became cool on the inside, but the people that threw them in, Taka, got burnt. It made the fire outside much hotter, but that's a Eish that is Doicha Eish. And which Eish eats Eish? That's the Shechina. And the Amar Mar, and again, Rashi reminds us, we're going to have this quoted in Sanhedrin, that when God created the world, he took counsel, and there was a group of Malachim that told God, don't create the world. What did God do? God, Kaviyachal, extended his little finger amongst them, and they completely were consumed. That's a fire that eats up another fire. Now the Gemara goes weiter. We learned Va'ashan Amaracha, the next miracle that we added, that Amad Aleph, that the smoke column, now that we established there was a smoke column, the smoke was coming from the physical Atzei Maracha, the Eshel Hediet, Afilu Kol Arucha Shaboilam, even if there's a lot of winds, all the winds are blowing, it cannot disperse it. Hold on. Let's learn about smoke reading. How to interpret the movements of smoke. So, Chevra, this is specifically in Eretz Yisrael, actually in Yerushalayim. We are looking at what the winds, Motzoi Shmini Atzeres, what we will call at the end of Simchas Torah, after Simchas Torah, what those winds allow us to have an insight as to how the next season will be. Will there be abundant rains? Will there, God forbid, be a drought? And we Pashat knew that by looking at the column of fire, at the column of smoke. The Matzoy Yom Tov Achron Shel Chag, the night after Shmini Atzeres, Hakoil Tzoifim LaAshan HaMelech. All the Yidden knew this. They knew, let's look at the column of smoke going up from the pyre. And they said like this: if Noita Klapet Safain, if it's leaning towards the north, which means this wind is coming from the south. Wind from the south means there's going to be so much rain. In a good way, which means the Aniyim were Smechim, and the Balabatim are sad. Balabatim means you're the landowners. Why are they going to be sad? That's the meaning of a southern wind. And therefore, there's going to be so much moisture in the produce that you cannot properly store it, it's going to rot. When people cannot store produce, they have to sell it. So once the market has an abundance of produce, the prices go down, which is good for the consumer. And especially if people cannot afford to own land, so the Aniyim were happy. And the opposite, if the column was leaning towards the south, what does it mean? It means that the wind is coming from the north. Then the opposite, it means it's going to be it's going to be very little rains. Now, not drought, but it will allow the Balabatim to store the produce. Then Aniyim Atzevim Balabatim Smechim. And therefore, Perisayim will be Mishtamrim, so there's going to be a lack on the market and the prices will go up. If not the Klapa Mizrach, if the column is facing east, which means it's a westerly wind, Hakoil Samechim, it's the perfect balance. In other words, there's going to be a plentiful, but it won't be that moist, you can store it. Somewhere, and everyone will be happy. And if Klapim Maidav, which means an eastern wind is bad, because it's going to be mamish no rain, there'll be a drought. So the kasha is, you tell me that all the winds did not scatter it, but here you see that it was moving. So the Gemara says, yeah, it was moving like a palm tree. It's not that it went up straight. It moved because of the wind, but it only moved, but it stayed together. It did not scatter. And now let's finish with this detail. What are we learning? We're learning that an eastern wind was bad. Yeah, Azoy, Amar Mar. We learned above, Klapi Mizrach HaKol Samechem. Klapi Mizrach means the column was towards Mizrach because the wind came from the west, which is good. Klapi might have an eastern wind, HaKol Hatzevim, V'niminu. A Braisa says the opposite. Now this Braisa is speaking about Bavel, and that will make all the difference. It depends where you are. Mizrach is winds coming from the east. Lo'elam Yafa. Here's Yistir. Marav is the first wide line in the bottom of the Amud, is always bad. That's the contradiction. The other two are fine. Ruach Tzfain is the northern wind. Yafa lechitin b'shashevi. If the chitim are already a third mature, from now on you don't need that much rain. Infrequent rain is fine, but the olives that are already ready to be blossoming, they already blossomed, they need a lot of liquid. So if there's going to be a northern wind, which means infrequent rains, that's fine for the wheat, but that's bad for the olives. And the opposite, ruach dereimis, which is abundant rains, kasher lechitim, because once wheat already is a third mature, it doesn't want that much water. It's going to flood it. But it's good for the olives that need that amount of rain. And I'll give you a good simon for that. That the shulchan was in the north. Shulchan had on it bread made out of wheat. So northern winds are good for the shulchan. The menorah was in the south because southern winds are good for the zaysim. Each one, so to say, is pulling for its own. High marba today, high marba today. The problem is east-west. Stira answers the Gemara. No, like kasha. Ha-lon, ha-lahu. The second Bryce is speaking about us in Bavel. Bavel, the land was moist, and therefore it's already moist. Having a lot of rain is not good. What we learned above, that everyone looked at the Eish on the Maracha, that's because it's speaking about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael requires a lot of rain, and their eastern wind is not good. So just to conclude with this concept, that when Hashem gives, is it good or bad? A lot of it is depending on me. So sometimes it's bad because I am not the way I should be. Sometimes the oil is not what's needed. The oil God gives, but the keli has to be the one that shifts in order for it to be better, for it to be better makabel, the gifts of God Almighty. God willing, tomorrow we're starting the second chapter.